Welcome to Pure Passion. I'm your host, David Kyle Foster. You know, sexual abuse is always damaging to a child, but there's something uniquely damaging when a mother sexually abuses her son. In fact, studies have shown that maternal abuse of a son can be a powerful causal agent in the development of homosexual confusion in the child. Today we're going to hear the story of a man who was sexually abused by his mother throughout much of his childhood. Add to that the emotional rejection that he suffered from his father and ridicule by his peers. The result was a life filled with homosexual confusion. Kent Paris is today a counselor of those who share this struggle, as well as a speaker who alerts crowds throughout the country to the damage being done to our children by the gay activist agenda in our school systems, in our churches, and in the media. This is vital information, so let's not waste a moment more.
My recollections would go clear back to kindergarten, and the perception, self-perception, that there was something different about me than the other boys. Other boys seemed more confident, athletic, which I wasn't at all. I was very withdrawn, very shy, very drawn, very attracted to boys who I deemed to be more handsome than I was. Obviously, it was not a sexual attraction in the very beginning, but as I grew with each passing year, I looked back on those times and reinterpreted them as having been gender issues. When I got into high school in particular, looking back and kind of interpreting the entirety of my life as having been homosexual. My father was a decent man, but my father was very emotionally withdrawn. My parents were not particularly close. My father had something of a dream child in my older brother, who was more mechanically inclined, who liked sports, who enjoyed hunting and fishing with Dad. I was kind of selected, I think, early on to be my mother's little partner. So when my brother and my father went off hunting or fishing and would be gone for 2 or 3 days, I was to be a little man of the house with my mom. I was much more connected with my mother emotionally and relationally than I was with my father. There was a depth of masculinity, of maleness in my father that seemed unreachable for me. I could not attain to it. So my earliest perception with my father was that he possessed something that I didn't seem to possess. And that only grew as far as my perception in elementary school, and then certainly after puberty and going into junior high, high school. I think in looking back, they seem to have the whole package of what boys, in my estimation, should have. Boyish boys, ruggedly good looks, confidence, good physique, social connection with those around them, social desirability. And I really lacked all of those things. I detested sports very early on. I was a very shy boy and the butt of a lot of joking quite early. Probably first grade was when the name calling began, queer and homo, sissy, those kinds of things, which at the time I had no idea what they meant, other than the general perception that they were derogatory in nature. And it made me feel that much more alienated from the boys. So I either stayed in class during recess or went off to a part of the playground all by myself. I think there were a lot of romantic and relational needs that were not being addressed by my father. My father was not a good communicator. My father and mother really didn't exhibit a lot of physical affection, or I didn't see them talking a lot. My mother, I was the youngest in our family, and my mother was artistically inclined. She did projects with me, taught me how to draw. But there was a darker side to the relationship with her that became the stuff of therapy later in my life. There were boundary issues with my mother, both sexually and emotionally, that at the time I would have viewed as normal between a mother and son. It was only later that I was able to look back and realize that there was a very unhealthy enmeshment between my mother and I, and some real disturbing ways that she related to me as a child that I would characterize very easily today as sexual abuse early on, ritual sexual abuse with my mother. I think she had a love-hate relationship with men. It was only later in life that I came to understand that my grandfather had molested my mother and both of her sisters. My mother was married previously before my father, and that man was abusive. He later molested my sister, my older sister, half-sister. So I think Mom came into the marriage with some real counts against men, and I don't think Dad could ever please her at any given time. That was part of his desire, I think, to get out of town, just as often as he could, fishing and hunting. At age either 10 or 11, I met my first real male friend, and fairly quickly, and I don't know who initiated it, but I spent the night with him and our clothes came off, and the way I say it, I felt like I had died and gone to Disneyland. There was something so enticing, so dynamic, something that touched things deep inside of me. I would view it now as the first male that I really had any kind of bond or connection with at the time. Unfortunately, it turned sexual very quickly. Between the ages of 11 and 15, I probably had upwards of 300 sexual experiences with him and with another neighborhood boy. All three of us were the same age. So there was a fairly deeply seated pattern beginning to develop for me. At age 12, I was molested by a teacher. At age 15, I was molested by a teacher. And at age 16, I was raped by a man who had gotten me drunk. And the residual impact of those experiences, especially when I was 15, and the teacher had groomed me very carefully over the course of a summer, was the lingering questions and doubts about myself. What did he see in me? Why was it that out of all the boys in the class, he picked me out to do this? What I didn't realize until later was that he had done this to dozens and dozens of boys my age. I was just another person in the process. But for me, it went a lot deeper. I really thought, well, I must be gay. There must be something in me that he sees and is able to seize upon. And that kind of sealed it for me at age 15. At age 15, when the three of us boys who had had sexual relations with one another for several years, in an unspoken way, I think all of us came to the realization that when adults do these things, they're faggots. And we all backed off from participation. Not one of us initiated another sexual contact with the other, and we had never talked about it with each other. But it was at that juncture when I realized stopping the behavior, stopping the experiences didn't change anything on the inside of me. If anything, the desire grew more intense. It was deeper for me. It was a longing that I couldn't address in any other way. And by that juncture, I looked back on the entirety and began to put two and two together, connecting the dots, going back to kindergarten, going back to first grade, and recalling the boys that I was very attracted to and continued to be attracted to with each passing year, and coming to the faulty conclusion that I was gay.
Your passion that beats for Christ alone. Your passion, nothing less.
My earliest recollection with my mother was my mother saying repeatedly as I was growing up, "You were supposed to be a little girl." I had wanted Kathy Ann. Well, I had an older sister and I had an older brother, so this never made sense to me and always made me feel that somehow as a boy I didn't measure up. I wasn't what my mother had wanted. But with the overstepped boundaries with my mother, I think inside I viewed women as unsafe. When I became a Christian at age 19, there was absolutely no desire at all to pursue a relationship with a woman. I had ceased acting out homosexually, but had almost resigned myself to a celibate life at that juncture. I think a lot of the damage that was done, I pushed behind a door and locked the door. I didn't actually open that up regarding my mother until I was about 40 years old. And it rose to the surface because of a number of events in my life that propelled me into therapy for about a 2-year period to open the door up, to look at those things, to finally voice the pain, the suffering as a child. My mother had bathed me past puberty. My mother knew no boundaries growing up, and my mother really knew no boundaries in the context of my early marriage to my wife. So part of the healing was understanding the reality of what actually happened in my life growing up, of being able to identify what was healthy and what was very unhealthy, of gaining a new conception of how to structure my relationship with my mother. Things that were okay for her to talk about or not talk about, ways of relating to me physically that made me uncomfortable. So I set boundaries into my relationship with my wife, with my mother, that were very freeing for me. I was part of the hippie era and had been on drugs, practically every kind of drug available, for a 4.5-year period of time. I had been a semi-professional rock musician, had been involved in the occult, and at age 19 had a near-death experience from drugs. I had run to the home of a local pastor and explained my situation. I had known his family. He took me to the ER. He and his wife spent the evening with me there throughout the night, kind of monitoring how things were going. And it was the next day that he sat down and shared the gospel with me. The gospel penetrated my heart. And his oldest son had been my best friend and had been in the gay life. We had not had a relationship together, but both of us realized that was an issue in our lives, homosexuality. In the gospel penetrating my heart and in coming to Christ, I think I realized from the outset that homosexual acting out was wrong. It was condemned by God. It didn't change my feelings. It didn't change my attractions. Those were still there, as strong as ever. So for me, that necessarily meant I would have to live a celibate life. I quit using drugs. I quit drinking. I quit acting out sexually. Over the course of 3 years, I had 2 young pastors who were just God's gift to me. One of them was very perceptive, very wise, and I think rightly understood from the outset that I had father hunger in my life, that I did not have good relationships with men, and those 2 men provided that for me and really helped me to begin to grow. I developed a growing friendship with my wife, Sherry, and after about 3.5 years, God took me by surprise, and I realized that the feelings that I had for her, the depth of commitment I had to the relationship was love. When I talk about Sherry, I didn't fall in love with her. I grew in love with her. And then suddenly realized after 3 years, I didn't want to live life without her. And God had really been doing a work in my heart. And we were married in 1975. Wedding was all planned, and I asked her, do you think it would be possible to maybe put this back 2 or 3 months? She was blown out of the water, immediately scheduled time with our pastor, and he knew exactly the reason. So I was encouraged to sit down with Sherry, tell her about my background, and fully anticipated that she would look at me square in the eyes and say, I can't handle this. I'm out of here. The opposite happened. She had tears streaming down her face, and she looked at me and she said, Ken, I'm not concerned about the past. I'm not concerned about what's happened in the past. I'm concerned about who you are today and where you want to go in the future. And most importantly, if you love me. And tears started flowing for me. We hugged each other, and 2 weeks later we were married.
Pure passion that beats for Christ alone. Pure passion, nothing less.
Hi, my name is Andy Reese, and I'm with the Freedom Resource. And I'm here to share some vignettes about freedom and about healing and some of the principles that we've learned over the years. And I want to start out with a story. An older man, I was with him, and we were in kind of a ministry situation, and he said this interesting thing. He was kind of into pornography and had struggled with it for a lot of years. And he said, you know, I think it's just my cross to bear. And we try to keep a straight face, because how many of us have heard that or even said that? And I finally just started laughing, and I said, nope, Jesus already bore that. And said, and in fact, I said, it's not inevitable that you're going to be stuck with that for your life. In fact, God said just the opposite. God said that you are predestined to be conformed to the image of Christ. Do you know what's inevitable? It's inevitable that you're going to be like Jesus. Let me say this. We know that specifically for you, Jesus came to make you like him. It says in 1 John chapter 3 that Jesus came to take away sins, and maybe another verse later it says, and we know that Jesus came for this purpose, to destroy the works of the devil. And so when we're about taking away sin, when we're about and its impacts, and the impacts of other sin on us, and when we're about destroying the works of the devil, we know that we're right smack bullseye ground zero in what Jesus is all about in our lives. Your freedom is God's will, and that's the end of the discussion. I may feel hopeless, but what is inevitable is that you're predestined to become like Jesus, that he who began a good work in you, he'll complete it until the day of Christ Jesus, that he's the author and he's a perfecter of our faith. And I want to share another point, and that is, you're okay now. You're okay now. See, when you were a sinner, Papa said, I choose you. And he's not saying, now I choose you, now clean yourself up, and when you're clean, come in and see me. No, he said, sit on my lap, don't go anywhere else. And you and I will be on one side of the table, and your sin and your wounding and your issues and the demonic things, those will all be on the other side of the table, because you and I are partners in that, and you're okay now. In fact, it's interesting, you look at Sarah or Abraham or David, every one of them messed up. And yet it's interesting in the New Testament, in what we call the Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11, God never looks back at Sarah and says she laughed and she disbelieved. He said, no, Sarah was full of faith. Because I want to share something else with you. God always, always, always comes at us not from our history, but from our destiny. God isn't in the business of holding our sins against us. Now, it's not that he overlooks those things. In fact, the sin issue was so important, he didn't leave it up to us to take care of. It was so important, he decided to take care of it himself. And that's really good news for us. It's not about sin. It will never be about sin. It's always about Papa saying, come sit on my lap and let's work things out together. You and I together. Because I want to tell you this. He's a happy God. He's happy about you. And he sees in you the things that you only dream other people will see in you. And he's very pleased about it. So I want to encourage you today that your freedom and your wholeness and your destiny, that's an accomplished fact in God's eyes. And he comes at you from that place of destiny and from that place of history. What's inevitable is that you're going to go from glory to glory to glory, becoming ever more like Christ. What's not inevitable is that the thing that you're dealing with and the constraint that you feel is your cross to bear. It's not your cross to bear. Don't believe the liar when he says that. Believe Christ when he says, I've come to take away sin and I've come to destroy the works of the devil in your life. I'm Andy Reese with the Freedom Resource. Bless you.
On our wedding night, one of my greatest anxieties in getting married, and part of the reason why I took a step back and wanted to perhaps go 6 months more before we got married, was the fear of not being able to fulfill her. The fear of not having the kind of physical response for her that would be appropriate in marriage. That I loved her was not an issue. My fears and anxieties were very powerful. The only thing that I knew to do was that evening we knelt beside our bed before we went to bed together. And we prayed and said, Lord, you're the one who has created our bodies. You're the one who made us male and female in your image. You're the one that created our sexuality as something that's good and blessed and is a gift. We invite you to be smack dab in the middle of our lovemaking and to teach us how to be good lovers to one another. I won't go into detail about our evening together. I will say that as we lay there in bed afterwards, the tears were flowing down my face because I had never experienced anything so holy, anything so joyous, anything so full of peace and health and goodness. There was no self-hatred. There was no sense of filth and dirtiness. There were no regrets. There was no sense of evil present. I had goose flesh. It was something totally unlike anything I had ever experienced before, and God blessed. My heart today in ministry, after all these years of counseling and working with people, remains much the same as it was early on, and that's that God would take the pain and the suffering that was in my life, take the stuff of my life like a loaf of bread and break it and give it to hungry people.
Ken Paris is a man who knows firsthand the damage that is done to a child by a people and a culture that practice and promote sexual immorality. Did you know that your children in grade school and up are being indoctrinated into the idea that homosexuality is good and healthy? Did you know that some public school curricula actually force children to watch videos that promote the gay lifestyle? In some classes, they are even forced to listen to graphic descriptions of perverted gay sex practices and encouraged to experiment on their own. We are destroying our children, both in the womb and in our school systems, as well as through the media. Any enterprising 5-year-old can access the most perverted and graphic pornography ever created by the mind of man. We send it right into their homes, into their libraries, and into their schools. Jesus had some rather strong words for those who would cause a child to stumble. Don't think that this generation will escape God's wrath for what we are doing to our children. For those of you who have already been damaged by the evil that runs rampant in our culture, there is hope. Jesus came to seek and to save those who are lost. He came to heal the brokenhearted and to set free the captive. Your homosexual confusion or sex addiction or other perverse attraction and behavior is not too hard for him to defeat. He simply needs a willing subject. He needs someone who is genuinely sorry for their sinful lifestyle and who is willing to turn away and leave it forever. He is looking for someone who wants to be redeemed, healed, and transformed by His power rather than by their own power. If you are that person, He is standing at the door of your heart right now, knocking. Let Him in. Let Him deliver you from the sentence of death that you've been under and take the reins of your life. Let Him heal you from your brokenness and lead you into the way of everlasting life. That's why He came to earth as Jesus Christ and let them crucify Him. He did it for you because He loves you. No, you didn't deserve it. Neither did I. That's the love of God. It's of another world and on another plane altogether. If you'd like more resources for this new walk out of darkness and into God's marvelous light, visit us at purepassion.us. And Lord willing, we'll see you here next week.